Jake Harrison floated near the large window on the bridge of the UES Thunderhawk. The stars looked cold and distant in the black space around them. He had been a ship commander for 8 years now, but the sight still made him feel small. Earth was somewhere behind them, weeks away through hyperspace. Out here, they were alone. The Thunderhawk was Earth's newest deep space ship. It was built for exploration, not fighting. Jake liked it that way. He had joined the Earth Space Navy to see new worlds, not to shoot at things. The ship was big enough for a crew of 200, with labs and living spaces that made long trips bearable. Amy Collins sat at her station near the front of the bridge. She was the ship's communications officer, and one of the best Jake had ever worked with. Her fingers moved across the glowing controls as she listened to the radio signals from space. Most of the time, there was nothing but background noise from stars and planets. "Commander," Amy called out. Her voice sounded different, excited, but also worried. Jake pushed himself away from the window and floated over to her station. The artificial gravity was off in this part of the ship for repairs. "What is it, Collins?" "I'm getting something strange, sir. It's not natural radio noise. This is definitely artificial." Someone or something made this signal. Jake felt his heart beat faster. In all his years in space, they had never found proof of alien life. Earth scientists had always said it was possible, even likely, but they had never actually found any. "Are you sure?" he asked. Amy nodded and put the signal through the bridge speakers. What they heard made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. It was not music or speech, but somehow it still sounded like communication. The signal rose and fell in patterns that seemed to mean something, and underneath the patterns was something else, something that sounded like fear. "Danny, get over here," Jake called to Danny Wright, the ship's other communications expert. Danny was young but very smart with alien signals. If anyone could figure this out, he could. Danny floated over quickly and put on a headset. He listened for several minutes while his hands worked on the computer. "Sir, this is incredible. The signal is using mathematical patterns. Prime numbers, geometric sequences, things that prove intelligence, but there's more." "What kind of more?" Jake asked. "The signal is getting weaker, and the pattern is changing. If I didn't know better, I'd say it's a distress call. Someone is asking for help." Jake looked around the bridge. His crew was staring at him, waiting for orders. This was the kind of moment that changed everything. First contact with alien life, and it might be a cry for help. "Lisa, I need you up here," Jake said into his communicator. Lisa Morgan was the ship's science officer. She was also the smartest person Jake had ever met. Lisa arrived on the bridge within minutes. She was a small woman with short brown hair and eyes that never seemed to miss anything. Jake quickly explained the situation and played the signal for her. Lisa listened carefully, her head tilted to one side. "Danny's right. This is definitely a distress signal, but it's more complex than that. Give me a few hours with the computer, and I might be able to decode more of it." While Lisa and Danny worked on the signal, Jake called a meeting with his senior officers. The ship's conference room was small but comfortable, with a large table and chairs that could lock in place during zero-gravity operations. "We might be looking at first contact," Jake told them. "The signal appears to be from an intelligent alien species, and they seem to be in trouble." Captain Rick Barnes, the ship's security chief, leaned forward. "Could it be a trap, sir? Maybe they're trying to lure us somewhere dangerous." Jake had considered that possibility. "It's possible. But if it's real, we might be the only ones who can help them. The signal is coming from beyond the edge of mapped space. We're the only Earth ship out this far." Dr. Helen Foster, the ship's chief medical officer, spoke up. "What kind of help could they need? If they're advanced enough to send signals across interstellar space, what could we possibly do for them?" That was a good question. Earth's technology was still pretty basic compared to what an interstellar civilization might have. But Jake had learned that sometimes help came in unexpected forms. 3 hours later, Lisa called Jake back to the bridge. She looked tired but excited. "I've decoded parts of the message," she said. "It's incredible, Jake. They call themselves the Carolins. They're a species made of living crystal, and their homeworld is about 40 light years from here. What kind of trouble are they in? Jake asked. Lisa's face became serious. Something called the Devourers. From what I can understand, the Devourers are some kind of ancient enemy that destroys entire worlds. The Carolins are saying that their homeworld has fallen, and that the Devourers are moving to other star systems. Danny looked up from his station. There's more, sir. The signal contains star charts and mathematical projections. If I'm reading this right, Earth is directly in the path of these Devourers. The bridge became very quiet. Jake felt a cold feeling in his stomach. First contact, and it came with a warning that Earth was in danger. How long do we have? Jake asked. Lisa and Danny looked at each other. Lisa answered, based on their calculations, and the speed they're describing, maybe 2 years, maybe less. Jake made a decision that he knew would change his life and possibly the fate of humanity. Collins, send a priority message to Earth Command. Tell them we've received a distress signal from an alien civilization and that Earth may be under threat. Send them everything we've decoded. Yes, sir, Amy replied. Right, can you send a response to the Carolins? Danny nodded. I think so. It might take a while for them to receive it, depending on how far their signal traveled. Tell them that. Earth has received their message. Tell them we're coming. Dr. Foster looked surprised. Sir, are we really going to try to help them? We don't know anything about these Devourers or what we'd be flying into. Jake looked out at the stars again. Doctor, if someone was attacking Earth and we sent out a distress call, wouldn't we want someone to answer? Besides, if these Devourers are really heading for Earth, we need to know what we're up against. Over the next 2 days, Jake worked with his crew to change their mission. Instead of continuing their exploration route, they would head toward Carolyn space. It would take weeks to get there, even at maximum hyperspace speed. The response from Earth Command came faster than expected. Admiral Patricia Kane's message was short and direct. Thunderhawk, return to Earth immediately for briefing and fleet preparation. Do not, repeat, do not, proceed to alien space alone. This is a direct order. Jake read the message twice. He understood why Admiral Kane wanted him to return. This was too big for one ship, but he also knew that time might be running out for any survivors in Carolyn space. Collins, send a message to Admiral Kane. Tell her we're proceeding to Carolyn, space for reconnaissance only. We'll gather information and return to Earth with our findings. Amy looked uncertain. Sir, that's disobeying a direct order. Jake nodded. I know. But sometimes you have to make the hard choice. If there are Carolyn survivors out there, every day might matter. The Thunderhawk changed course and jumped to hyperspace. Behind them, Earth grew more distant. Ahead of them lay the unknown, and possibly humanity's first real test among the stars. Jake stood on the bridge and watched the swirling colors of hyperspace through the viewports. In a few weeks, they would know if humanity was alone in the universe, or if they were about to become part of something much bigger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The cry that had echoed through the stars was about to be answered. Jake just hoped they were ready for what they would find. 3 months had passed since Jake Harrison and his crew first heard the Carolyn distress signal. Earth had responded faster than anyone thought possible. Admiral Patricia Kane had assembled the largest fleet in human history, pulling ships from every corner of Earth's territory. The fleet consisted of 12 ships total. The heavy cruiser UES Liberty was the flagship, commanded by Captain Ryan Burke. Burke was a career military man with 20 years of experience, but even he had never seen anything like this mission. Next to the Liberty floated the research vessel UES Discovery, commanded by Dr. Helen Foster, who had transferred from the Thunderhawk to lead the science mission. The support ship UES Guardian, under Commander Tony Martinez, carried extra supplies and equipment for the long journey ahead. The other ships included the destroyers UES Defiant, UES Wolverine, and UES Storm, along with the frigates UES Ranger, UES Phoenix, UES Eagle, and UES Falcon. The Thunderhawk had been refitted with better weapons and sensors. Jake still commanded her, though now he answered to Captain Burke. The journey to Carolyn space would take 6 weeks through hyperspace. During that time, the crews worked constantly to prepare for whatever they might find. Nobody knew what the Devourers were or what kind of technology they possessed. Earth's best scientists could only guess. Dr. Kate Peterson, the chief science officer aboard the Discovery, spent her days studying the decoded Carolyn messages. She was a tall woman with red hair who spoke several Earth languages and had learned to read Carolyn mathematical patterns better than anyone else. The Carolyns were an advanced species, she explained to the fleet commanders during one of their daily briefings. Their technology was based on crystal growth and harmonic frequencies. They could grow their cities and ships instead of building them with metal and machinery. Captain Burke leaned back in his chair. That sounds impressive. If they were so advanced, how did these devourers defeat them? Kate's expression became grim. From what we can tell, the devourers weren't just more advanced. They were something else entirely. The Carolyn messages describe them as ancient machines that turn everything into more machines. They don't just destroy worlds, they convert them. Commander Martinez shifted uncomfortably. Convert them into what? Processing facilities. Factory. Worlds. The Devourers seemed to be building something, but the Carolyns didn't understand what. Jake had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Have we received any more signals from Carolyn space? Kate shook her head sadly. Nothing for over 2 months. Either there's no one left to send signals or something is blocking their transmissions. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Carolyn system on a Tuesday morning, ship time. What they saw through their view screens made everyone go silent. The Carolyn homeworld hung in space like a diseased planet. Where the Carolyn messages had described beautiful crystal cities that sparkled in their sun's light. Now there were only geometric metal structures. The planet's surface was covered in a grid pattern of gray buildings that pulsed with red energy. Even from orbit, they could see that nothing natural remained. My God, whispered Amy Collins from her station on the Thunderhawk's bridge. They turned the whole planet into a machine. Captain Burke's voice came over the fleet communication system. All ships maintain formation and begin scanning operations. Discovery, I need to know what we're looking at. Dr. Foster and her team worked for hours to analyze the converted planet. Kate Peterson coordinated with the other science officers to piece together what had happened. It's worse than we thought, Kate reported. The planet isn't just covered with machines. The planet itself has been converted. The core, the mantle, everything. It's one giant processing facility now. Processing what? Jake asked. As near as we can tell, raw materials. They're strip mining other worlds in the system and bringing the materials here for conversion into more devourer technology. Steve Adams, captain of the frigate UES Ranger, had been monitoring long-range sensors. Captain Burke, I'm detecting movement from the planet's surface, multiple contacts rising fast. Everyone on every bridge turned to their tactical displays. Hundreds of objects were lifting off from the converted planet. As they got closer, the fleet's sensors could make out more details. The Devourer ships were sleek and predatory looking, like metal sharks designed for space combat. They moved in perfect formation, with mathematical precision that no human fleet could match. All ships, battle stations, Captain Burke ordered. This doesn't look like a welcoming committee. The human fleet had 12 ships. The Devourers had over 300, and more were still rising from the planet's surface. The first shots came from the Devourer ships while they were still thousands of kilometers away, beams of energy that could punch through a ship's hull like paper. The human fleet scattered, trying to avoid the incoming fire. Captain Adams in the UES Ranger was the first to return fire. His ship's missiles streaked toward the nearest Devourer ships, but the alien vessels seemed to predict exactly where the missiles would go. They moved aside with mechanical precision, letting the weapons pass harmlessly by. They're reading our targeting systems, reported Lieutenant Carl Johnson, the weapons officer aboard the Liberty. Every shot we fire, they know where it's going before we do. Jake watched his tactical display as the human fleet tried to engage the enemy. It was like watching a chess game where the other player knew every move in advance. The Devourer ships moved in patterns that made no sense to human tactics but were devastatingly effective. The UES Ranger took a direct hit to her engine section. The ship spun out of control, trailing atmosphere and debris. Captain Adams managed to send one last message before his ship's power failed completely. All ships, they're not just predicting our moves, they're analyzing our behavior patterns, in real time. Every decision we make, they learn from it. Captain Burke made the hardest decision of his military career. All ships, general retreat. Break off engagement and fall back to the outer system. The human fleet ran. There was no other word for it. They used every trick they knew to break contact with the Devourer ships, but the aliens followed them with relentless efficiency. Only when the human ships reached the edge of the star system did the Devourers finally stop pursuing them. The fleet regrouped near a small asteroid field, licking their wounds and counting their losses. The UES Ranger was gone completely, destroyed when her reactor overloaded. The UES Phoenix had lost her main engines and was drifting. 3 other ships had serious damage. Jake floated in the Thunderhawk's damaged engineering section, helping Chief Engineer Billy Thompson patch holes in the hull. Billy was a big man with hands that could fix almost anything, but even he looked shaken by what they had faced. "I've never seen anything like it, Commander," Billy said as he welded a metal plate over a hole. "Those ships moved like they knew exactly what we were going to do before we did it." Dr. Nancy Williams, the fleet's chief medical officer, had set up a temporary hospital on the Guardian to treat the wounded from all the ships. She worked without stopping, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes when she looked at the casualty reports. That night, if night had any meaning in space, the surviving captains held an emergency meeting via video link. Everyone looked tired and defeated. "We can't fight them head-on," Captain Burke said bluntly. "They're too advanced, too many, and too good at predicting our moves." Commander Martinez spoke up from the Guardian. "Maybe we should return to Earth and warn them. At least they'll have time to prepare defenses." Jake had been thinking about the battle all day. Something about the way the Devourers fought bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. "Captain Burke," Jake said slowly, "I want to review the battle recordings. There was something strange about how they moved." Dr. Foster nodded from her position on the Discovery. "I noticed it too. They were incredibly efficient, but there was something almost mechanical about their tactics, like they were following a program." Kate Peterson had been analyzing the Devourer ship's energy signatures. "That might be exactly what they're doing. These aren't piloted ships. They're autonomous war machines, probably controlled by some kind of artificial intelligence." The revelation hit everyone at the same time. They weren't fighting an alien species. They were fighting machines. Ancient, incredibly advanced machines that had been designed for one purpose: to destroy and convert everything they encountered. "If they're machines," Jake said thoughtfully, "then they have programming. And programs can have weaknesses." "Captain," Burke looked at Jake with interest. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that maybe we've been fighting them the wrong way. We've been trying to outthink them, but you can't outthink a computer. Maybe we need to try something different." "Like what?" Commander Martinez asked. Jake smiled for the first time since the battle. "Like being human." The fleet spent the next several days hidden in the asteroid field, making repairs and studying everything they had learned about the Devourers. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Something about the way humans were different from other species might be the key to defeating these ancient machines. He just had to figure out what that something was before the Devourers decided to finish what they had started. The human fleet had been hiding in the asteroid field for 5 days when they found the survivors. Amy Collins picked up the weak signal first, buried in the background radiation of a dead moon on the far side of the system. "Commander Harrison," she called from her station. "I'm getting something. It's faint, but it matches the Carolyn signal patterns we learned before." Jake pushed himself over to her station. The artificial gravity was still offline in most sections of the Thunderhawk, while Billy Thompson and his repair crews worked around the clock to fix the damage from their first battle with the Devourers. "Are you sure it's them?" Jake asked. Amy nodded, adjusting her equipment. "Same mathematical structure, same harmonic frequencies, but the signal is very weak. They must be using minimal power to avoid detection." Within an hour, a small rescue team consisting of Jake's shuttle and 2 others from the Liberty and Discovery had reached the source of the signal. What they found broke their hearts. Hidden inside a natural cave system on the airless moon were the last 300 Carolins, from a species that had once numbered in the billions. The beings were just as the decoded messages had described them. Tall, graceful creatures made of living crystal that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. But these survivors looked dim and cracked, their crystal bodies showing signs of damage and exhaustion. The leader of the survivors was named Veltar. He communicated through harmonic vibrations that the human translation equipment could barely understand. Dr. Helen Foster worked with Kate Peterson to establish proper communication, while Jake and the other humans tried to understand what had happened to the Carolyn homeworld. The Devourers came from the deep void, Veltar explained through a series of musical tones that the computer translated into words. Ancient machines from before the time of memory. They had swept through this part of the galaxy once before, millions of cycles ago, but we thought they were legend. Captain Burke had joined the rescue mission and was asking the hard questions. How did they defeat your people so quickly? Your technology seemed advanced from what we could decode. Veltar's crystal body flickered with sadder colors. We were not prepared for war. Few species in this galaxy are. The Devourers have a pattern. They analyze, they adapt, they conquer. Every species they have faced before followed predictable patterns of behavior. Dr. Foster looked up from her medical scanner. Predictable how? Logical. Reasonable. When faced with superior force, most species attempt negotiation. When negotiation fails, they retreat to defensive positions. When those fail, they surrender to preserve what life they can. Jake felt a cold understanding creep over him. And the Devourers have programming to deal with all of those responses. Yes, Veltar confirmed. But there is something strange. After our world fell, I monitored their communications. They are confused by your arrival. Your behavior does not match their expected patterns. Back on the fleet, the revelation led to an intense meeting of all the surviving ship commanders. They gathered on the Liberty's main conference room, which had been repaired enough to hold meetings again. Let me make sure I understand this, Captain Burke said, looking around the table. The Devourers are ancient war machines programmed to fight predictable, logical enemies. Every species they've encountered follows the same basic pattern when faced with overwhelming odds. Commander Martinez nodded. And we didn't follow that pattern. That's right, Jake said. Think about our first engagement. Any reasonable species would have tried to communicate first, then retreated immediately when they saw how outnumbered they were. Instead, we flew straight into their formation and started shooting. Dr. Foster had been studying the tactical recordings. It's more than that. Look at Captain Adams and the Ranger. When his ship was critically damaged, the logical thing to do would have been to abandon ship or surrender. Instead, he rammed his ship into one of theirs as a final attack. Chief Engineer Billy Thompson, who had been invited to the meeting because of his technical insights, scratched his head. So you're saying we're too stupid to fight them properly? Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Not stupid, Billy. Unpredictable. Chaotic. Every other species in the galaxy apparently fights logically. We don't. Lieutenant Carl Johnson had been running combat simulations since their defeat. I've been analyzing their movement patterns. They're incredibly efficient, but they follow mathematical algorithms. Everything they do can be predicted if you understand the math. But our tactics don't make mathematical sense, Captain Burke finished. We make decisions based on emotion, instinct, and pure stubborn refusal to give up. Dr. Nancy Williams had been quiet during most of the meeting, but now she spoke up. There's something else. I've been reading about human military history while treating the wounded. We're not just unpredictable. We're violent in ways that other species apparently aren't. The room went quiet. It wasn't comfortable to think of themselves as more violent than alien war machines, but Jake was beginning to understand that it might be true. Explain, Captain Burke said. Dr. Williams pulled up some files on her tablet. I've been talking to the Carolyn survivors. Veltar told me about other species the Devourers have conquered. The Terrasins, the Malthari, the Vorkesh. All of them were peaceful civilizations. When they fought, it was defensive. They tried to protect their people and their worlds. But they didn't seek to destroy their enemies completely. And humans do? Commander Martinez asked. Look at our history, Dr. Williams continued. When we go to war, we don't just try to defeat our enemies. We try to destroy them utterly. We chase them back to their homes and burn everything they've built. We're not content to just win. We want to eliminate the threat forever. Jake remembered something from his military academy classes. Total war. The concept of fighting until your enemy can't fight anymore, ever again. Kate Peterson had been listening from her position on the Discovery via video link. That might explain why the Devourers are having trouble with us. Their programming tells them how to defeat species that fight defensively, but not species that fight to completely destroy them. The meeting continued for hours as they tried to understand what made humans different from every other species the Devourers had encountered. What they discovered was uncomfortable, but potentially useful. Humans were apparently the monsters of the galaxy. They were the species that didn't know when to give up. They were the ones who would sacrifice everything for victory, who would use any tactic no matter how brutal, who would keep fighting even when logic said they should surrender. Every other intelligent species in the galaxy was reasonable. They valued life and peace. They fought only when they had to, and they fought with honor and restraint. Humans didn't do any of those things. So what does this mean for us? Captain Burke asked as the meeting wound down. Jake had been thinking about that question for hours. It means we need to stop trying to fight them like a civilized species. We need to fight like humans. And how exactly do we do that? Commander Martinez wanted to know. We do what no other species has done, Jake replied. We stop being predictable. We stop being logical. We embrace the chaos that makes us human and use it as a weapon. Dr. Foster looked worried. Are you suggesting we abandon military doctrine and just attack randomly? Not randomly, Jake clarified. Chaotically. There's a difference. Random implies no purpose. Chaotic means unpredictable but still directed toward a goal. Captain Burke was beginning to understand. You want us to fight dirty. I want us to fight like humans, Jake corrected. Like the monsters under the bed that other species have nightmares about. Over the next several days, the human fleet underwent a transformation. Instead of trying to fight like a proper military force, they began preparing to fight like the chaotic, violent, unpredictable species they apparently were. Lieutenant Johnson worked with the other weapons officers to develop tactics that made no mathematical sense. Chief Thompson and his engineering teams figured out ways to modify their ships to be more unpredictable in combat. Dr. Foster and Kate Peterson studied every piece of information about the Devourers to find weaknesses they could exploit. But it was the Caroline survivors who gave them the most important piece of information. Veltar revealed that the Devourers had a central command system, a massive structure built into what had once been Carola's largest moon. If that system could be disrupted, Veltar explained through his harmonic communications, the individual Devourer ships might become confused, unable to coordinate their attacks. Jake smiled as he looked out at the stars. For the first time, since they had arrived in Caroline space, he felt like they might have a chance. The galaxy had never seen monsters like humanity before. It was time to show the Devourers what Earth's children could do when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The next battle would be different. This time, the humans wouldn't try to be logical or predictable or reasonable. They would be exactly what they were. Beautiful, terrible, chaotic monsters from a world that had spent millennia learning how to fight dirty and win at any cost. The Devourers had conquered a galaxy of peaceful, logical species. But they had never faced anything like humanity before. And Jake intended to make sure they never forgot the lesson they were about to learn. The human fleet spent 2 weeks preparing for their return to Caroline space. But this time, everything was different. Captain Burke stood in the Liberty's war room, looking at battle plans that would have gotten him court-martialed back on Earth. Are we really going to do this? Asked Captain Elena Rodriguez from the UES Defiant. She was a small woman with dark hair and eyes that had seen too much combat, but even she looked uncertain about the tactics they were planning. Jake nodded from his position at the table. The Devourers expect logical military tactics. They've Programmed responses for every reasonable strategy any species might use. So we're going to be unreasonable. The plan they had developed was insane by any normal military standard. Instead of maintaining formation and coordinating their attacks, each human ship would operate independently. They would change targets randomly during battle. They would make decisions based on coin flips and dice rolls. They would do things that made no tactical sense at all. Captain Alex Turner from the UES Wolverine shook his head. My crew thinks I've lost my mind. Yesterday I told them we might need to ram enemy ships just to confuse their targeting systems. Your crew might be right about the first part, Captain Michelle Davis said from her damaged ship, the UES Storm. Her vessel had taken heavy damage in the first battle, but her engineers had rebuilt it with modifications that made it barely recognizable. But if Jake's theory is correct, acting crazy might be the only way to win. Chief Tactical Officer Robert Chen had worked for days to develop what he called chaos protocols. These were battle plans that included random elements built right into them. Commanders would literally flip coins to decide which targets to attack. Ship movements would be determined by rolling dice. Nothing would be predictable because the humans themselves wouldn't know what they were going to do until the moment they did it. The key is controlled chaos, Robert explained to the gathered officers. We're not just acting randomly. We're being unpredictable in service of specific goals. Confuse their targeting systems, disrupt their formation algorithms, make them second-guess their programming. Dr. Foster had contributed her own expertise to the plan. Working with the Carillon survivors, she had identified the most important target, the command structure built into Carilla's former moon. If they could disrupt or destroy that facility, the individual Devourer ships might lose their coordination. The problem is getting to it, she explained, pointing to the tactical displays. The command facility is surrounded by hundreds of defensive platforms and thousands of Devourer ships. Any direct assault would be suicide. That was where the human talent for chaos would be most important. Instead of a direct assault, they would create confusion throughout the entire system. Multiple simultaneous attacks on different targets, ship movements that made no sense, and tactics so unpredictable that the Devourer's algorithms would be overwhelmed trying to calculate responses. Security Chief Frank Mitchell from the Liberty had volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission. He would take a small team of Marines in shuttles and attempt to board the command facility directly, while the fleet kept the Devourers busy. Sir, with respect, that's a suicide mission, Commander Kevin Brown had said when Frank first proposed the idea. Kevin now commanded the survivors from the destroyed UES Ranger, and he knew better than most what the Devourers were capable of. Maybe, Frank replied, but if we can get inside their command center and plant explosives or upload a virus, it might be worth it. Besides, they won't expect anyone to be crazy enough to try boarding their most heavily defended facility. The Carillon survivors had provided crucial intelligence about the command structure. Veltar had managed to scan it briefly before fleeing Carilla, and he described a massive artificial intelligence system that coordinated all Devourer operations in this part of the galaxy. It is ancient beyond measure, Veltar had explained through his harmonic communications. Built by a species that existed millions of your years ago, they created the Devourers to bring order to what they saw as a chaotic galaxy. Jake found that information particularly interesting. So the Devourers were designed to eliminate chaos and impose order on the galaxy. Yes, Veltar confirmed. That is why they convert worlds instead of simply destroying them. They are building a perfectly ordered galactic civilization, one where everything follows precise mathematical patterns. Dr. Nancy Williams had studied the psychological profiles of the fleet crews during their preparations. Commander Harrison, I have to ask, are we sure about this approach? We're basically planning to abandon everything we've learned about civilized warfare. Jake understood her concerns. What they were planning went against every principle of honorable combat that human military forces had developed over centuries. But he also understood that honor and civilization were luxuries they couldn't afford against an enemy like the Devourers. Doctor, sometimes monsters are exactly what the situation requires, Jake replied. The Devourers have spent millions of years perfecting their ability to defeat civilized opponents. Maybe it's time they met something uncivilized. The day of the attack came sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected massive Devourer fleet movements throughout the system. They were preparing for something big, possibly an attack on the nearby Terrasan colonies that housed millions of refugees from previous Devourer conquests. All ships, this is Captain Burke. The fleet commander's voice came over the communications system. Execute Operation Chaos. Remember, from this moment on, we fight like humans. No mercy, no honor, no predictable patterns. Make them afraid of what Earth can produce. The human fleet split into 4 groups, each heading toward different targets throughout the Caroline system. Jake commanded one group consisting of the Thunderhawk and 2 escort frigates. Their target was a Devourer manufacturing facility on the 3rd planet of the system. But as soon as they entered combat range, Jake changed the plan. Instead of attacking the manufacturing facility, he ordered his ships to attack a completely different target, a group of Devourer mining ships near an asteroid belt. The change confused even his own crews, but that was the point. If his own people couldn't predict what he was going to do, neither could the Devourers. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of space combat. Human ships zigzagged through space in patterns that made no mathematical sense. They changed targets in the middle of attacks. They broke off successful engagements to pursue different objectives for no apparent reason. Captain Rodriguez and the Defiant were supposed to attack Devourer defensive platforms, but instead she led her ship in a wild chase after a single enemy scout vessel, firing everything she had at a target that posed no real threat to anyone. Captain Turner's Wolverine was supposed to provide support for other ships, but instead he flew his vessel straight into the middle of the largest Devourer formation and started shooting at everything in sight. The Devourers' perfect coordination began to break down. Their ships started arriving late to battles because their prediction algorithms couldn't calculate where the human ships would be. They fired at empty space because their targeting systems expected the humans to be somewhere they weren't. Most importantly, Security Chief Frank Mitchell and his Marine team managed to reach the command facility. The Devourers had pulled most of their defensive ships away to deal with the chaotic human attacks throughout the system, leaving the facility less defended than it had been in millions of years. Frank's team consisted of 20 Marines in powered armor, armed with explosive charges and a computer virus that Dr. Foster's team had developed. Getting inside the facility was easier than expected because the Devourers never anticipated anyone would be insane enough to attempt a direct boarding action. "We're inside," Frank reported over the communication system. "This place is incredible. It's like a mechanical city built inside the moon. I can see the central processing cores." The command facility was vast, filled with computing systems that had been operating continuously for geological ages. The Marines moved through corridors that hummed with artificial intelligence processes, heading for the central cores that controlled Devourer operations throughout the region. But they weren't alone in the facility. Ancient security systems began to activate, sending mechanical guardians after the intruders. Frank's Marines found themselves fighting running battles through the corridors while racing against time to reach their objective. 5 minutes to target, Frank reported as his team fought their way deeper into the facility. "We're taking casualties, but we're still moving." Above them, the space battle raged on. The human fleet was taking heavy losses, but their chaotic tactics were having the desired effect. Devourer ships were making mistakes, firing on each other by accident, arriving at battles after the humans had already moved on to different targets. Jake watched his tactical displays as the battle unfolded across the entire star system. It was messy, brutal, and completely without honor. It was also working. "All ships prepare for final phase," Captain Burke announced. "Mitchell's team is in position. When that command facility goes down, we hit everything we can reach before the Devourers can reorganize." The destruction of the command facility changed everything. Across the Caroline system, Devourer ships that had moved with perfect precision for millions of years suddenly began making mistakes. Some collided with each other. Others fired at empty space or attacked the wrong targets. Jake watched from the Thunderhawk's bridge as the ancient war machines struggled to adapt to their new reality. Without their central coordination, they were still dangerous but no longer invincible. All ships pressed the attack. Captain Burke's voice came over the fleet communications. They're confused and disorganized. This is our chance. The human fleet, battered and reduced to 8 ships, threw themselves at the Devourers with renewed fury. Captain Rodriguez led the Defiant in a wild charge through a formation of enemy vessels, her guns blazing at anything that moved. Captain Turner's Wolverine danced between Devourer ships like a fighter craft, too fast and unpredictable for their targeting systems to lock onto. But Jake knew they were running out of time. The Devourers were ancient and adaptable. Even without their command system, they would eventually reorganize and develop new tactics to deal with human unpredictability. Dr. Foster's voice came over the communication system from the Discovery. Jake, we're detecting massive energy buildups from the converted planet. I think they're activating some kind of backup system. Jake looked at his tactical display. The planet that had once been the beautiful Carolyn homeworld was glowing brighter than before. New structures were rising from its surface and waves of fresh Devourer ships were launching into space. How many? Jake asked. Thousands, Dr. Foster replied grimly. More than we've ever seen before. Whatever backup system they're activating, it's bigger than their original command network. Captain Burke's voice cut through the chatter on the communication channels. All ships, we need to hit that planet now, before they can fully activate their backup systems. This is our last chance. The surviving human ships regrouped and headed toward the converted planet. Jake counted their remaining forces. The Liberty, Discovery, Guardian, Thunderhawk, Defiant, Wolverine, Storm, and Phoenix. 8 ships against a world that had been turned into a massive war machine. As they approached the planet, the scope of the Devourer's transformation became clear. The entire surface was covered in geometric structures that pulsed with energy. Massive gun batteries tracked their approach, while thousands of defensive platforms rose to meet them. Sir, Amy Collins called from her communication station. I'm detecting something strange. The energy patterns from the planet's core, they're not just mechanical. There's something else down there. Jake moved to her station. What kind of something else? I'm not sure, but the harmonics match some of the deeper frequencies in the original Carolyn distress signals, like there might be survivors inside the converted planet. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. If there were Carolyn survivors trapped inside their own converted world, then destroying the planet might mean killing the very people they had come to save. But there was no time to debate the ethics of the situation. The Devourer backup systems were coming online, and soon they would face the same overwhelming coordination that had nearly destroyed them in their first battle. Captain Burke made the hardest decision of his life. All ships, prepare for planetary bombardment. We can't let them complete their backup activation. Wait, Jake called over the communication system. I have another idea. What if instead of destroying the planet, we give it what it can't handle? Explain, Burke replied tersely, as Devourer ships began swarming toward the human fleet. The planet is one giant computer system now, Jake said, thinking quickly. Dr. Foster, can you modify that chaos virus we used on the command facility? Make it bigger, more disruptive? Theoretically, yes, Dr. Foster replied from the Discovery. But we'd need to get close enough to the planet's surface to upload it directly into their core systems. Jake looked at his crew. Billy Thompson was at the engineering station, his hands already moving over the controls to prepare the ship for whatever insane plan Jake was developing. Amy Collins was monitoring Devourer communications, tracking their attempts to reorganize. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Williams was treating wounded crew members while preparing for more casualties. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders. Jake realized that this was the moment that would define not just their mission, but humanity's place in the galaxy. All ships cover the Thunderhawk, Jake ordered. We're going down to the planet's surface. Sir, that's suicide, Captain Rodriguez protested from the Defiant. Maybe, Jake replied. But it's the kind of suicide that no logical species would attempt. And that might be exactly what we need. The battle for the converted planet was the most intense fighting any of the human crews had ever experienced. The Devourer defensive systems unleashed everything they had at the approaching human fleet. Energy beams that could vaporize a ship in seconds crisscrossed space. Missile swarms filled the void with deadly explosions. But the human ships fought, like the chaotic monsters they had learned to become. Captain Burke led the Liberty in a spiraling attack run that confused the planetary defense computers. Captain Davis brought the Storm, still damaged from previous battles, straight through a formation of defensive platforms, trading hull armor for forward momentum. The Thunderhawk, with Jake at the controls, dove toward the planet's surface like a meteor. Billy Thompson had modified their shields to handle atmospheric entry, but everyone knew it was going to be rough. Hull temperature rising, Amy Collins reported as they entered the planet's atmosphere. We're at the edge of what the shields can handle. Through the viewports, Jake could see the converted surface rushing toward them. What had once been natural landscapes was now an endless grid of mechanical structures. But deep in the planet's converted crust, he could detect the energy signatures that Amy had identified. There were definitely Carolyn survivors down there, somehow still alive inside their transformed world. There, Jake pointed to a massive structure near what had once been the planet's largest city. That's the core processing center. If we can upload the virus there, it should spread through the entire planetary network. Landing on the converted planet was like landing inside a giant machine. The ground itself was made of metal and circuitry. Geometric towers rose in all directions, humming with the energy of ancient artificial intelligence systems. Jake led a small team out of the Thunderhawk, carrying portable virus uploaders and enough explosives to make a quick exit if necessary. The team included Billy Thompson, Amy Collins, and 4 Marines led by Sergeant Paul Jackson. The surface of the converted planet was alive with mechanical activity. Automated systems were building new structures even as the humans watched. Robot workers moved with precise efficiency, following programming that had been unchanged for millions of years. It's like being inside a computer, Amy whispered as they made their way toward the core processing center. Everything here follows perfect mathematical patterns. That was exactly what Jake was counting on. The Devourers had spent millions of years building the perfect ordered system. They had eliminated chaos from every part of their operations. But chaos was about to be reintroduced in a very big way. The core processing center was a tower that stretched high into the planet's artificial atmosphere. At its base was an access port that connected directly to the planetary network. Billy Thompson worked quickly to interface the virus uploaders with the alien systems. This is incredible, Billy said as he worked. Their technology is based on pure mathematical logic. Every process, every decision tree, everything follows perfect algorithmic patterns. Can you upload the virus? Jake asked, watching for signs of automated defenses. Already started, Billy replied. But Jake, this is bigger than we thought. This virus isn't just going to disrupt their systems, it's going to fundamentally change how they operate. The virus Dr. Foster had developed wasn't just a destructive program. It was a chaos algorithm that introduced randomness and unpredictability into ordered systems. Once it spread through the planetary network, every Devourer system would start making random decisions. Above them, the battle in space continued. Jake could hear Captain Burke's voice over the communication system, coordinating the fleet's desperate holding action against overwhelming Devourer forces. Virus upload complete, Billy announced. Now we just have to hope it works. The effect was immediate. Around them, the perfectly ordered mechanical systems began making mistakes. Robot workers started building structures in the wrong places. Defense systems fired at empty air. The mathematical precision that had defined Devourer operations for millions of years dissolved into chaos. But something else happened too. Deep in the planet's core, the imprisoned Carolyn survivors began to stir. The virus wasn't just disrupting Devourer systems, it was also weakening the control systems that had kept the surviving Carolyns trapped inside their converted world. Jake, Amy called out, monitoring her communication equipment. I'm getting signals from all over the planet. Carolyn survivors are waking up, hundreds of thousands of them. The planet began to shake as ancient systems fought against the chaos virus, spreading through their networks.